What is going on, everybody? Back again for another episode of Sunday Reset with Will and Friends. And as I mentioned before, I want to make this a regular habit of doing the solo pods because it's nice to have this longer format to connect with my audience and share a little bit more about what's going on in my life. But I wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about my why. Why am I doing this? Why does any of this matter to me? And it's wild to think about the long term plan of this because for those who don't know, I've been blogging since 2018 and I blogged for years and years and then I wrote a book. And then in the final days of the writing that, then I decided I was going to start doing social media and making videos because I needed a new creative outlet for that. And then that's where the short form videos came into play. That's where appearing on podcasts started to happen. And then I kept doing that for years and years and still blogging from time to time and uh, doing book events. And it was really fun. And it's all just been this giant amalgamation. And then through the podcast experiences, that's how I got here today with this show. But I realize now that there's probably some people that have come along for the journey that have seen my videos and they associate myself with mental health, but they don't necessarily know why all this matters to me. And so I thought I'd take a moment today to really kind of break down why I do this in the first place. So the story begins with me when it comes to mental health. Not quite at the beginning, but we'll get there. I found myself in a really dark place in the fall of 2015. I had not lived up to any of the expectations that I had set for myself. And I was at a point in my life where I felt that death would have been a relief of some sort. I hadn't quite gotten the plans together, but I had gotten myself to a place where I knew that I was living a life that I couldn't live anymore, and the pain was too unimaginable, and it was just a matter of when, not if. And thankfully, my father showed up one day, unannounced, and found me. And I hadn't done anything drastic, but we weren't far probably off from that. And that's really, really hard for me to talk about because it's hard for my parents, it's hard for my sisters, people who love me to hear because frankly, I didn't want any of their help. I felt like the biggest burden the world had ever known. And I was so consumed by the fact that I wasn't worth any of their time. And I think that's an important place to start the story because, frankly, I should have dove further into my mental health journey. My mom pushed me to try to go to therapy, and I couldn't take it seriously because to me, like I still didn't really fully grasp what was wrong with me. I was like, oh well, it was dark, but we're okay now, right? And then it took me getting truly punched in the face by life. So, as I mentioned, my dad showed up unannounced. I ended up moving back in with my parents for a period of time, and I'm working at Red Robin of all places. I worked there in high school, and I still knew some people there, so I was serving, and I was just living my life and staying at my parents' house, and I everything kind of felt normal-ish. You know, I'm keeping a steady job and I'm hanging out with friends again. I'm doing all this stuff. So, like, why dig too deep into anything that's wrong? Who cares? That we're good now, right? And then some good things happened. I got different jobs and kind of got back into corporate life a little bit. And I met somebody, and she was amazing. She was this infectious person that had a laugh that just filled up a room, and um, her name was Allison Shaper, and she was great. We met. It was funny. We met on Tinder, and we hadn't actually met up in person yet. We'd only messaged on there, and then we were both happened to be at the same bar, and uh, we kind of both realized it. And then our friends, being cool, they kind of switched places with us, so we got to kind of talk to each other. And then yeah, we talked throughout the night, and it was great. And then I ended up leaving with some friends, and then she ended up asking for me to come back. I was in a cab, and she asked me to come back and get her and help her get home. And she was kind of drunk, to be honest. And so I did, and I just made sure she got home okay. And um, that was it. And I got back at the cab. I left. I didn't. I just made sure she got to her place, and that was it. Um, and then I was like, well, I think I owe you like a proper date. And so we went to a brewery that doesn't even exist anymore, and had dinner, and yeah, it was infectious, just being around her. And I wasn't sure if I was in the right place mentally to be in a relationship, but I couldn't stop being around her. I just felt better with her. And so we kept dating, and things got serious. And then one day, I found myself in a little bit of a panic because we'd spent the weekend. I'd spent it at her place, and when we were there, I I was there with her. She had to go to work that evening. It was Sunday night, and then Monday morning, I came around to text her, and I just kind of said, "Hey, good morning. Hope you have a good day." Didn't hear back from her. I think it's important to understand she used to work in a bakery, so like for her, sleeping in was 7 a.m. So this is like 8 or 9. Haven't heard from her, and text a couple more times. Hey, just if you actually slept in for once, I'll be surprised. Somewhere along those lines. And still didn't hear from her. And so then I started to get a little worried. But no, I mean, hey, maybe she was busy. Maybe she just had stuff going on. Maybe she slept in. Who knows? Give her a call. Don't hear back from her. Another call. Don't hear back from her. And now it's getting a little later in the day, and I'm trying to, like, at the time I was selling beer for a living, so I'm like just bouncing around accounts, liquor stores, bars, restaurants, trying to act normal, but deep down inside I'm like, what's wrong? What is happening? And I eventually go back to my parents' house, and I see my sister, and she's like, well, why don't you just go over there? And I'm like, I think in the moment I was like, oh, that's silly. But then in my head, really, I was scared of what I'd find. So I called local hospitals. It had been raining that day. I thought maybe she got in a car accident or something. And no one had come by. So then I eventually messaged one of her friends because at this time she was still in school full time and worked full time. And but a couple of her roommates were on spring break. And so I didn't have any of their numbers, but I messaged one of them on Facebook, and I just said, hey, this is what's going on. Have you heard from her? And, because I'm like, if she's just mad at me, that's okay. Like, I just want to know she's okay. She's like, it's crazy. I haven't heard from her either. And she started reaching out, couldn't. So I just said, hey, I'm going to go over to your apartment if that's cool with you. And uh, when I did that, went over to her apartment, and I saw her car there, and my heart sank. So I run up the stairs and the door's locked, and I'm just trying to break it down. And I just can't. And I had to look like I don't even want to know what I looked like. I didn't care, frankly. I was just like, something's wrong. We need to get in here. And so I messaged her roommate. I said, hey, I'm gonna call emergency maintenance. Like her car's here, but like the door's locked. I can't get in. And so I called emergency maintenance and I explained the situation. So like, you can talk to this person. I don't care, but like we need to you can talk to her roommate. Like we need to get in here. This is serious. Eventually they come, and at that point everything's in slow motion. They uh they show up and we call 911. But there was nothing we could do. She started to go. And I want to be very clear, this was not an attempt on her own life. This was natural causes, but that's important to the story because then what proceeds to happen is in the midst of all the chaos and craziness that's going on, the police, of course, need to understand what happened. And so they took me to the police station and sat me down in the interrogation room, just like you see in the movies, and proceeded to go through our sex life, drugs, everything you could think of. Just they're trying to make sense of this whole thing. And it's one of those situations you just can't make sense of, unfortunately. It's a young person's not supposed to die like this. And so, but nonetheless, they have a job to do. But I'm sure that whole night, I'm sure I had to look and say I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. Um, but I leave that night and I go home and I don't think I slept at all. I began to just call friends and let them know what happened and took the next day off of work. Um, it was a Monday. I took Tuesday off and then I was back at it Wednesday. As if that's a normal thing to do. Um, and I remember I break it down to one of my I was in one of my clients' offices and I just like broke down for a second. And she's an incredible person for the way she handled that. And so I say all this to say, eventually, that's a traumatic thing, right? That's a really hard thing to go through. And so, um, it was actually my grandfather, of all people. My grandfather's Midwest stoic guy, not really his thing, but he was the one who looked at me and my grandmother and he said, "Kid, you're not supposed to know how to deal with this." And that's when that hit me. I was like, oh shit, I have to go to therapy. I have to deal with this. And so I did. I went to therapy and I didn't know what the hell to say. I didn't know what I'm supposed to do here. I looked at it truly as a transactional thing. Hey, I'm a broken toy. You need to fix me so I can get back to living my life. And it was in therapy that I learned, it's not just about like obviously like you're dealing with grief in this moment. Grief is serious needing to deal with that, but it's everything that happened in your life prior to this traumatic moment that impacts how you grieve and what feelings you're feeling in this moment. And that was just completely over my head until I was working with a therapist and walking through that. Because what I realized in therapy was so much of what was pushing my grief was I blamed myself. I should have seen this coming. I should have noticed it. But keep in mind, I have zero medical training. I want to be very, very clear in this. I have zero medical training. I have no ability to, yet somehow my ego permitted me to believe that I was capable of seeing something that no doctors ever noticed, nothing that anyone else had seen. No. I'm the one who's supposed to know that. Because deep down, I hold myself to a standard that I would never hold anybody else to. Because prior to those moments, prior to that period of my life where I didn't want to be alive anymore, I had had 5 brain surgeries at that point. I've had 6 total now. But at that point, going back to 2015 when I didn't want to be alive anymore, prior to that moment, I had had 5 brain surgeries, 2 when I was a baby and 3 when I was in high school. And so the baby, I was 2 months and 4 months old, and the jump is 4 months old and then 16, and quite. I have a condition called hydrocephalus. It's when the cerebrospinal fluid that surrounds your brain, your body, brain brings it in, drains it out naturally. Mine brings it in, but none of it leaves. So I have a device called a shunt that is on the side of my head, and there's a straw that brings it in, drains it out, goes down to my abdominal cavity. Your body brings it in, drains it out naturally. Mine needs this device. The problem with the shunt is it's a man-made piece of plastic. It's going to break. That's just how it works, and it's inevitable at some point in time. Um, so I was diagnosed at 2 months old, 4 months old, had a malfunction, had to have it replaced, and then I didn't have another problem until I was 16 years old. I was in high school, and um, so honestly, like at 16, like by that point, I was aware that I had the condition, but like it hadn't been a focal point of my life, so I really hadn't thought too deeply about it. I would go to my regular, neurosurgeon appointments and things like that. And again, I was very aware of it, but like it just wasn't a regular existence in my life. Um, and then one day when I was in high school, I was sophomore year, I just finished a proofs exam, and I was going to third period, and I collapsed in the hall. I asked if I could go to the bathroom, and then like class had started, but I ran to the bathroom real quick. And when I went to the bathroom, I collapsed in the hall, thankfully like right outside the nurse's station, and the nurse brought me in, and honestly we thought I had the flu. My grandparents came and got me. They had to help carry me out of school, and I was just so sick. And yeah, my mom loves this part of the story. It was also her birthday, my mom's birthday. And so why that's important is because my dad was going to go visit her at work, or yeah, I forget exactly the circumstances of what happened, but he left the office to come there, and I think he was going to go do something else, and he decided to come home and check on me. And I'm on the couch and I'm miserable. My grandfather's sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee and reading a book or something, and my dad touches my leg, and he's like, "Wow, you're like cold to the touch." And so he goes to get the thermometer, tries to get my temperature, doesn't read. Tries another thermometer, doesn't read, and then he's like, calls the doctor and says, "Hey, this is bad." He's like, "Well, just take him to the ER, and we'll sort it out from there." And then my dad tells them, "Hey, by the way, he has this condition. I don't know if that's what's going on here, but like we haven't had a problem since he was a baby, but nonetheless, like this is something there." And I could be wrong on this, but I vaguely recall they took my temperature and they said something in the vicinity of like 80 something, high 80s is my temperature. Fahrenheit, for those who may be watching in another place. Um, Not what you're supposed to be. Not exactly. And that's the last thing I remember. It's about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and that's the last thing I remember of this day. Next thing I remember is like 8 or 9 p.m. that night, and I wake up and I'm in a different hospital. I know that. I know that I'm in a different hospital. The wallpaper is different. Just the whole vibe was different. And I'm like, what the hell happened? And they tell me, hey, your shunt malfunctioned. We had to replace it. You had brain surgery. You're going to be okay, though. And I didn't believe them at first. I was like, what? What are you talking about? This isn't a thing. I haven't had a problem since a baby. Like, it's not going to be a problem now. Uh, Super smart 16-year-old. Not believe the nurses or anybody around you. So they tell me this, and I remember this movie that I had seen where a kid had the condition that I had had, and then when he had had the surgery, um, he had a bunch of tape on the side of his head. So I touch my head, I feel it, and I'm like, oh shit, oh shit, I'm this really happened. And so now all the realness is sitting in, and then they're like, hey, your family wants to see you. And what I know now about that moment that I didn't know for a very long time until I took therapy seriously after Allison had died was that I saw the pain on anybody who loved or cared about me's face and watching me go through this. I saw the pain in their eyes, and I realized this is going to be a problem for the rest of my life. I'm going to subject I'm going to subject the people I love the most in this world to constantly be in fear for my health and my well-being, and so I can't do anything about that. But I have to be exceptional. I have to be exceptional because if I'm not exceptional, if I'm not sun, moon, stars, if I'm not all these things, then I couldn't possibly be worth loving. Because I'm already a sunk cost. I'm already at a net negative to anybody I know because I'm gonna have this thing, this surgeries, and I'm gonna have more, and it's a ticking time bomb. I had the surgery when I was 16, and then I had two more when I was 17. Like a year later, two more, and then I've had one more since then. And it's going to happen again. I'm 33 years old. Um, and so I just know anybody who loves me, anybody who cares about me, they're gonna have to worry about me forever. So if that's the case, if they're gonna subject themselves to being connected to me, then the least I can do for them is be exceptional in every other way. That sounds ridiculous. Like as I'm saying it out loud, like it sounds so ridiculous, but I truly believed that. And inevitably I couldn't meet that. I could not possibly have met that standard that I held myself to. And so that leads to 2015. That's like I said, we're going to get there eventually. We had to start there because you need to understand where the mental health journey began. Because the reason I hated myself so much is because I couldn't possibly live up to this ridiculous standard. And when in reality, all anyone ever needed of me, it wasn't about a career, it wasn't about how smart I was or how funny or any of those things. All anyone needed of me was to be a good person. And I couldn't just accept that. And the minute that I felt like I wasn't living up to what people needed of me to be worthy of their time and love, then I fell into a pit of depression. And so I say all this to say that it took trauma for me to really unpack that with a therapist and really understand the depths of who I am and why I was the way I was. And I don't want that for anybody in my life. But when I look back at the darkest parts of my life, all of those things, what hurt the most was I felt so incredibly alone. I felt like nobody was going to understand me. And I, I just, it hurt to exist. And I didn't want to burden anybody else with it. But I truly felt that in my heart of hearts that nobody would get it if I tried to tell them. So I'm better off just suffering in silence. So that's why I do this. That's why I started blogging. That's why I started making video content. That's why I make this podcast. That's why I do any of the things. I wrote a book. All of it. All of it is with one very simple mission, which is I want others to feel less alone in their struggle. And so I'm willing to be the person to step forward and say, hey, I've struggled. I damn sure do not have all the answers. But if my vulnerability gives anyone the impression that they're not alone in their suffering, that it's all worth it. Because maybe then that is that little bit extra they need to talk to somebody, whether it's a therapist or a friend or a family member, whoever the case may be, just anybody. And it's all worth it. All of this is worth it. And so I wanted to come on here because I wanted to tell that story because I've had, I've done a number of podcast experiences and I've got to tell bits and pieces, but I've never got to truly just sit down and tell the story as I see it as a whole. So that's why that's why I do this. My mission is to share in those experiences, to share the things that I've learned along the way in therapy. And by the way, I'm still in therapy. I actually stopped going for a while because I thought I was good, and I was, to be fair, truly. Um, but then life had other plans, and I dove back into it. And I've been with the same therapist now for 3.5 years, something along those lines. And by no means do I think I have all the answers. I assure you, I don't. Um, and my place in this conversation is not expertise. If anything, I want to bring light to expertise of people who actually have the ability to help and technical expertise of that. My role in that is not to be an expert. My role in all of this is to tell stories that resonate with people to make them feel less alone and to try to bridge the gap between those who are in pain and those who can potentially help and the resources that can potentially help. That's what I want to do. That's what I care so deeply about. So if you're listening to this, please share this episode with somebody that you think might need it, might want to hear it, might want to feel less alone. Feel free to share my content. I'm pretty much universally mental health with Will across YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, you name it, TikTok, all of it, for as long as we have TikTok, I guess. I'm in this in a mission to make people feel less alone and to try to end some suffering. I don't I love this quote so much. I cannot be all the good the world needs, but the world needs all the good that I can do. And that's what I aim to do. So I appreciate you all listening. Please be kind to each other. You have no idea what battle anybody else is fighting. And I look forward to sharing this episode and then sharing my next guest. So moving forward, by the way, we're going to be doing, it's going to be a bi-weekly podcast. And so we're going to be doing solo podcasts on the off weeks, and the other half we're going to be doing um, guest appearances. So stay tuned for more. And I love you, and I appreciate you all for listening. Thank you so much for enjoying Sunday Reset with Will and friends.